In the serene, tree-lined community of Willow Creek Estates, where pastel homes stood in perfect symmetry and neighbours exchanged cordial smiles during morning walks, no one could have imagined the dark current flowing beneath the manicured surface. My mother, Margaret Reeves, a retired school librarian with silver-streaked hair and hands worn by decades of turning pages, lived quietly in a modest beige townhouse at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Confined to a wheelchair due to a degenerative spinal condition, she had always been fiercely independent and remarkably optimistic, the kind of woman who saw beauty in clouds and poetry in the sound of rain. Her small garden bloomed with wildflowers, and she took joy in watching finches at the feeder and feeling the wind against her cheeks. Life was humble, peaceful, until the HOA, under new leadership, turned her sanctuary into a war zone. The president, Cynthia Brock, a woman with a tight jaw, unnaturally stiff posture, and a relentless obsession with order, took control of the association like a dictator in pearls, imposing arbitrary fines, rewriting community rules without consent, and targeting residents who deviated from her sterile vision of perfection. My mother's sin: a wooden wheelchair ramp we had installed for her mobility, painted to match the house, expertly built, and previously approved by the board years earlier. It was modest, practical, and entirely necessary. Yet within weeks of Cynthia's takeover, we received a formal notice claiming it was aesthetically unapproved and a violation of uniform design. I wrote back immediately, attaching documentation, ADA compliance reports, and photographs. No response. Then came the fines. First $50, then $150, then $500 for a non-conformity, a non-response, and a failure to correct. I appealed through the appropriate channels, but my letters vanished into silence. Neighbours whispered about similar letters, about the once friendly HOA transforming into a punitive regime. Stories trickled in of elderly residents threatened for flower pots, for wind chimes, for porch chairs. But the horror reached its peak on a rainy Thursday, a day I left home early to pick up groceries and prescriptions. My mother, as usual, was on the front porch reading, wrapped in her lavender shawl, the ramp dry and clean. I returned 3 hours later to find her chained, yes, physically chained, to the porch railing. Her wheelchair had been zip-tied and padlocked by the HOA compliance officer, a private contractor the board had hired. He told her the ramp was closed pending review, fastened the platform shut with industrial cable, locked her wheels to the railing, and left without a second glance. She was soaked, shivering and humiliated, unable to move, call for help, or reach shelter. I cut the locks with bolt cutters from the garage, held her as she cried in my arms, and documented every inch. The chains, the puddles at her wheels, the red marks on her wrists. That night, I uploaded the footage and photos online, writing a post titled, "My Disabled Mother Was Chained by Our HOA." The internet exploded. Within 24 hours, we had over 2 million views. Journalists reached out. Legal advocates shared our post. Disability rights organisations called us. But what we didn't know, what we couldn't have known, was that this single act of cruelty had pulled back the curtain on a much larger nightmare. The FBI had been quietly investigating Willow Creek Estates for 6 months. Cynthia and her board were already under federal surveillance for election fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. They had falsified ballots during board elections, funneled Jesus into fake landscaping companies, and weaponized their power to silence dissenters. Our video, my mother's terrified eyes and the rusted chain links, gave the agents the final probable cause they needed. Within a week, agents from the Public Corruption Task Force arrived at our door, presenting badges and requesting sworn testimony. My mother, though shaken, agreed. She sat in her armchair, wrapped in her shawl, speaking slowly but firmly into their recorder. What followed was a whirlwind of subpoenas, arrests, and late-night news coverage. Federal agents raided the HOA office, uncovering a hidden safe behind a false cabinet, full of cash bundles, burner phones, and falsified invoices. Cynthia was arrested at 5:40 a.m. in her robe, paraded past flashing cameras as residents looked on in disbelief. The fallout was massive. The entire HOA board was dissolved. A class action lawsuit was filed by 27 residents. My mother's case, now elevated to a federal civil rights lawsuit, became a national headline. the wheelchair, the chains, and the HOA president. Interview requests flooded in. She appeared on a morning talk show, nervous but radiant, speaking gently about the dignity of disabled individuals and the quiet strength of fighting back. The Ada Foundation awarded her a Medal of Courage. But while justice roared, the personal aftermath was slower. She had nightmares. She feared being alone outside. For weeks, she refused to sit on the porch. I built a new ramp, wider, safer, with motion sensor lights, and installed cameras. Slowly, she began to reclaim her space. Neighbors, once distant, brought food, flowers, and stories. One woman said Cynthia fined her for hanging a flag. Another confessed to paying $900 in silent compliance. As the HOA grip faded, a new board formed, elected fairly this time, inclusive and transparent. They met in open meetings, televised on Zoom, and posted every financial decision online. The new president, a retired veteran named Harold, made accessibility his first priority. Porches blossomed again, gardens grew, wheelchair ramps stayed. My mother began reading outdoors again. She hosted book clubs, served tea, and waved at children riding bikes. The chain we had cut from her wheelchair? We kept a link in a glass jar on the mantel, a reminder not of pain, but of perseverance. She said once, as we watched the sunset together, they tried to bind me with fear, but they only proved how strong I am. That strength, quiet, firm, and unbreakable, changed not just our lives, but an entire community. And somewhere deep inside me, I believe it helped the country rethink the power we give to unchecked authority and what it takes to stand against it.